Thank you very much. I must say I've thoroughly enjoyed what I've heard so far, and everything is very much echoing what I feel, that failure, don't worry about it. The If poem, of course, has been on my wall for many, many years, and I thought that was a very, very enlightening session. Mine is effective networking. Networking hasn't got a very good name. You think of it as something that's rather brazen, people rushing into a room, picking out the most important person, talking to them, and then leaving and going on to other things. And I think good networking is really making the most of the people you meet to your mutual advantage so that both of you get something out of it. You may not get reciprocation that day, but later on in your life, you'll find that if you're generous with your contacts and interested in people from all walks of life, it really is not just something that's good for a business, but it is, I think it's not an add-on, it really is essential. So I'll tell you a little bit about my philosophy of networking, then my own background, and then maybe some of the practicalities. And I hope that that sort of gives an idea of why, to me, networking, and I'll broaden it not just from business, but professionally and personally, I think friendship, it really is the joy of life. It's been, I would say, a solace to me, the people that I've met. I may have these 40,000 people. It's not because I'm particularly anybody that people necessarily want to meet. It's because of hard work of when I meet people, when I go away after this weekend, I'll have a few business cards, I think. I'll have noted people that have interested me, and I'll put them into what is now my electronic database to make sure that I keep in touch with them. And I think that's all you can do through life. I think we're defined by the company we keep. No longer today is it necessarily our own backgrounds, where we were born, the sort of parents or households we've come from. We're defined by the company we keep. And the wonderful thing is we can keep any company we like. We can choose the people that interest us, who are interesting, who we think we can help and we think can be helpful to us. And that really is the only reason I've got my 40,000 names in my database. So I also feel that you've got to have the philosophy that you want to meet other people. You don't have to be a gregarious person, but just someone that feels that you can learn from others. And I think that this way you can know that you can cope, because failure was talked about just now, and nobody wants to fail. But as you say, if you fail, sometimes out of that, something new, some new idea comes. And I think that you've got to really know that you can cope. Then that releases you to do all sorts of things in life. And if I want something on my stone, my gravestone when I die, it's to say she took life in her stride and she stretched her potential. And I think if that's what you do, if I met you all again, next year, and you said that you'd had a go at things, you may or may not have failed, I hope your businesses and your enterprises and your entrepreneurship will have been better. But if you've done that, I hope you would feel very, very satisfied. I think that you really should take life by the scruff of the neck, seize the moment and enjoy the now. You're sitting here now and you're kindly listening to me. And I think if you can take what away you can from whatever you're doing, whether it's your job, your life, your relationship, enjoy that. If you don't like it, of course, make little plots in your mind, how you'll move on, how you'll do other things. But if you're only thinking of other things, you often miss the real pleasure of what you're doing, even if it's not the thing you think you necessarily want to finish on. So I think that's really my philosophy. I had a mother who was very wise. I feel she was born wise, but she was born to a family where my grandfather, I go back a long way, was actually in what we had in the UK workhouses. He hadn't got much money at all. Mama passed her matriculation for university, couldn't afford to go to university, and went to work actually in the butcher's shop. Met my father, who was 16 years older than her. He'd been a boxer in the British Army, and they married. And my brother was born a very, very shy boy, my brother, and I think it was because he was 2 years older than me and so shy that I reached out to other people that Roger might get along with that I wouldn't. And that's when I learned the valuable lesson that all sorts of people, without your realising it, can really be people that can help and be rewarding. I think we tend to think that we'll go for the top people, but often the top people come down, and it's the younger people and the people who perhaps you meet from walks in your life who remember you and think, I remember Carol Stone from 2 years ago. They may have been in a junior position, but for some reason you helped them, or you talked to them, or you got to know them, and then I think that helps you in life. So what happened to me then? Okay, I went to grammar school in the UK. I left school at 17, didn't go to university, and eventually, after a couple of years, I actually went to a model school for 6 months, Lucy Clayton Model School, but I had too big a hips to be a model, so I went to be a secretary instead. I joined the BBC at 21, and they said to me as a secretary in the newsroom, and they said, when you're 23, they said, you'll be established staff in the BBC. Means you'll really be on the way, there'll be a pension, and there'll be a different life for you. 23, I thought, in 2 years' time, I'll be married and well on the way to my first baby. I thought I'd probably have 6. How wrong was I? It was to be 36 years before any man asked me to marry him. I was 57, that was 13 years ago, I'm 70 now, and I can tell you, when he asked me, I said yes immediately. He says, gratefully. But I think even in marriage, I learned that all those years when I sat waiting for the phone to ring, I was having dinner or drinks with girlfriends, but really thinking about the man that hadn't rung. Why didn't I make much more use of those single years, enjoy them to the full? And now that I'm married, often I think, I want to stay out longer or whatever it is. Only a little, but that I want to stay out longer or whatever it is. And Richard will say, well, enjoy yourself, sweetheart, but the pasta will be on the table at 8 or 8:30, whatever it is, because he loves cooking. So there are drawbacks, but I never think of them for more than a second because I remember the years that I was on my own. Now I'm hoping and enjoying very much there. Richard's 6 years older than me. He was a BBC reporter. He's travelled the world as a television reporter. And all I can say is he'd been married before he met me, divorced 4 years after I met him. And I'm sure if I had a long, in-depth conversation with his wife, first wife, there'd be lots that I'd agree with her. But I've got to say that to me, we just work. It's just right. And I think in life, you've got to take your instincts. And Richard said to me in the first years when I was not quite sure, he said, just know it's right, sweetheart. But he did keep me waiting 11 years before he asked me. But I'm glad I stayed there. I think he thought, having married at 40, it went wrong. He'd never do it again. Anyway, I rather stray. I stray off my topic. So there I was at the BBC, and after a while, I'd been there about 4 or 5 years. I went to local radio, and I became eventually a radio producer. And then they said, did I know much about politics? I was asked by the controller of BBC Radio 4. I did not, but of course I said, yes, I did. And that's another thing. I don't know how many of you do say yes rather than no, because I believe so strongly that it's so often the things you don't do in life that you regret rather than the things you do and don't necessarily work out. So I said yes, and I went to bed with what we call the Vashers Parliamentary Companion, and I got to know, in the best sense, 2 MPs a night, and within 3 months they gave me the job of producing this political discussion programme. And that's where I really built up my database, because I was inviting the great and the good from politics and business and media to a live discussion programme once a week. Then I left the BBC, and I thought I was going to be a television star because I did a pilot programme called Facing 50. I thought, I'm Opera of UK is on the way. But it did not happen. But I brought people together, and I started by having lunches at my flat. I just have 8 people a week on a Tuesday and a Thursday for a little salad. And then eventually, after about 6 months, I earned £2,500 the first year I left the BBC, and I'd been earning £22,000. And then one of the guys there, chairman of a company, said, would you put together a group of people for me, Carol, bringing the sort of people you know, perhaps a politician or a media person or a business person? And I said, yes, I would. And he said, I'll get my assistant to ring and offer this to you. And she rang up and she said he wants you to do, I think it was 6 lunches a year for him, bringing people together. And my darling mother was alive then, and she was there, and I was going, they're asking me to do 8 lunches a year. And so I said, yes, how much would that be? And so they said 8, and I said, I'm going to get 800 quid. And Mama said, would you have to pay for the food? I said, will I be paying for the food? No, we'll do that. But below me, the contract came, it was 8,000. And within a year, I was earning $250,000 just on my own, putting people together. So I'm only saying that because it was because I'd nurtured my people. I'd been holding my lunches, and even at the BBC, I used to bring people together. I think if you do nurture people and make sure you remember them, people feel that it's only in the sad times. A friend of mine, son hanged himself. I rang her every day for a year. She thinks I was a very, very good friend. I was in many ways. But 4 years later, she rang me to say that she was having her book published, her second book, and that she'd got the advance from the publisher. Well, I've written 2 books on networking. £1,000 was my first advance, £3,000 was my second advance. Wonderful order, I said. How much is the advance? £250,000, she said. I can tell you all my friendship to rejoice in her triumph. And I think that you do need to be able to rejoice in people's triumph. It's when people are successful that they need friends about them as much as they do when they're not successful. That's why sometimes I think we don't go and talk to people who are at the top of their profession thinking they don't want us. But they do. They need us just as much as when they're going through very, very sad times as too. Of course, that also is very important for friendship. So at any rate, I was very, very shy. People think, oh, well, you're very gregarious, Carol. I was very shy. If you can hear, I've got a coarse voice. I actually got very big feet, size 10, so never was really somebody that felt I was a femme fatale. And also, what you can't see is I've got very small boobs, but what you can see is I've got a very large nose. So you just think small boobs, large nose. Had that been the other way around, life could have been very different. So I think that then I did any questions. I left the BBC. I didn't make it as a television. I made it as putting these lunches together. And then I was asked to form a think tank by a market research company. And I got 5,000 people who agreed to answer questions once a month on social and global issues. It was an international think tank. And I did debates around those issues. So that's really my career. So now I suppose I really ought to say a little bit more about how you actually, practicality, put research or networking rather into practice. And if you're going into a room like now, we're going to go out after we've finished and sort of network and do what we like. First of all, if there's anybody that interests you or looks interesting, go and talk to them, because you don't want to leave here thinking, I wish I'd spoken to so-and-so. That should not happen. So make sure you talk to them. I often get a couple of glasses of wine, and then if I get fed up with somebody, I say, I've just got to go and deliver this glass of wine to somebody. So whatever you want to do, but remember, they want to leave you as much as you want to leave them, because networking is just a couple of minutes. Try and get the feel of each other, a bit like small talk. People say small talk is, oh, I don't do small talk, I only do large talk. Well, I tell you, small talk is a bit like foreplay in lovemaking. You know, you have to do a little bit of exploration before you go for it. And I think you have to do that with networking. You have to explore before you actually go into the big decision of whether we should be in and out of Afghanistan or what we think of the Eurozone. So I think you've got to have that talk with just a little bit, have you been here before? Do you know anybody? How did you get here? Whatever it is. I think you've also got to be very sure that you don't worry about snubs, by the way. This is very important because it happened to me twice yesterday. Got here on Thursday night. I was exhausted. I went to the White Ribbon Breakfast on Friday, which was very good, but I was sitting somewhere, and then the girl came up, and she was going to sit there, and there was someone's bag there, and I was going to sit there. So I thought, well, I'll move that girl's bag, and I'll speak to her. And she said, oh, I wouldn't move the bag if I was you. I said, all right then. I thought, perhaps I shouldn't. Then she went over the other side of the room. I thought, well, she didn't want to sit next to me. So for about 30 seconds, I thought, I think she subbed me. Then I thought, no, I think she was probably very intent on something else. She didn't necessarily particularly really want to sit next to me, but on the other hand, she wasn't actually snubbing me. But even if she had, what does it matter? Then I wanted to go to see that sensational musical, Book of Mormon. So I tried every way to get a ticket yesterday, and in the end I stood in line for 2 hours to get a ticket. And I got chatting with the 2 or 3 people, and I said to the woman, why don't we go and have a meal before we go out? We only had an hour. And she said yes, and I could see her saying something to her husband. And then when she got the ticket, she said, well, we'll see you out later then. So obviously he said, no thanks. So again I thought, oh, I'm very disappointed. And then I thought again, what does it matter? It doesn't matter. If it's someone you know, you can say, did you mean to be that rude? And if you don't know them, you're never going to see them again. So you don't have to worry. So I think you've got to sort of, everything in life is your attitude. When you wake up in the morning, you know how sometimes you wake up and everything's wonderful. You don't know why. Is it because the cat slept across your lap? Is it because you're going to go and have a nice meal? Whatever it is, the same thing can happen a day later and you don't feel wonderful. So it's all about just the attitude you put on life. I think if you put the attitude on life, that you can get something out of it. And at the end of the day, I go through everything, every conversation, make a note, anything you promise. Remember that people are known by their reputation. And if you have a reputation of being sloppy, saying I'll send that phone number, that article, and you don't, then you get known as a sloppy person. And I think if you do things, I'm a great believer, you do things for the right reasons, things happen. If you're buying a house, don't buy it with 2 B-days because you think it'll resell because you're stuck with 2 B-days. Do things for the right reason, and then I think you find that right things come from it. So I think that's all I was going to say there. And just a last word about salons. It's a rather grand name for a very easy thing. But if you meet people, you haven't got time to have coffees and teas and lunches with them, and they haven't got time either. So I think if you can start what I call a salon, just say to someone, for the next 4 weeks on a Monday, for the next 6 weeks on a Tuesday, just choose an hour and a half, Monday to 6 to 7:30, in your home, in a room in your office, in a bar above a pub, wherever it is, same place, same time, same day. Come along, bring someone if you wish. You'll find that you'll see people, as you probably meet 2 or 3 people today, you could invite to come along to that. It's a wonderful way of scooping up people you're not quite sure what you want to do with, and then you can keep in touch with as you want to. Another thing with practicalities of work in the room, don't ever leave anybody on their own, because they'll do the same to you one day. So if you're speaking to someone you want to move on, bring them with you to introduce them, or introduce them to somebody else and then move on. There's so many things you can do, but you must circulate, you must seize the moment, you must always say, what if I leave with not having taken advantage to what this is? But I can only say that many of you, I'm sure, are already networkers, but I can only say the more you actually exchange and learn from each other, and when you share something of a failure of your own, you'll find that a lot of other people have had the same sort of thing. My brother died in his 40s, actually. My brother, who was very shy, and in his 20s, he was diagnosed as suffering from paranoid schizophrenia. But all I can say is Roger taught me to reach out to other people. And so his life, although he had a tormented life, he always thought of me, which I feel very proud of, as his kid sister. And when I did say I'd met 1 or 2 people he knew who were people that we wouldn't normally have met, used to say, Carol always did fantasize. But he was my brother, and he taught me things, and I think everyone in life can teach you things. So that's why I think networking is important. Right, quick questions. And well, you were... 5 minutes. And has anybody got a question? And if you have, can you tell me who you are and where you come from? Please. Come on, someone's got a question. Yes, this lady's got a question. You can ask it from there. You're not. She's just taken it. Look at that. What false happiness. Here we are. Here's a lady here. Good. Thank you so much. Can you tell me your name and what sort of background you've got, what you're doing?
Okay, so sorry for you guys for repeating. So the 3 of us work at a K-12 school, and we're running an entrepreneurship program for youth. And what advice do you have in the sense of should we do networking games, or, like in middle school and high school where maybe a lot of the students know each other or they already have groups of friends? Do you think that maybe incorporating networking so they're talking to kids who maybe they wouldn't speak to is a good idea?
What are you trying to achieve?
So they learn the skills of just not being afraid to reach out to people, realizing that they can learn from everyone, realizing that they're missing out if they just hang out with like 1 clique of friends and they don't get to know other people.
I think that's a good idea. You could do the salon. You could say once a week we will say that we'll be here for an hour after school, or in lunch hours, or in the morning, whatever it is. I think that's a good idea. The big new thing is this, or was in the UK, this speed networking idea, where you speed network with people. Have you heard of that? Has that been here? Where you but speed dating, well, that's even more into speed networking, but you just sort of have 12 chairs this side and 12 chairs that side. You sit opposite someone, you have about 2 minutes, and you have to tell someone about who you are or what your greatest fear is, and they tell you, and then you move like musical chairs, and at the end of the sort of like 15 minutes, you've met 10 people. You could just try that if they don't know each other very well, but definitely, I think if you could suggest, maybe someone could even, not actually a book club, but someone could come along with one thing they want to ask, or one thing that particularly interests them, or something they would like to know about it. Well, good luck anyway. Than that. Have I got what's this lady here? Oh, can I get 2 more? Have I got 2 more? Can I have a couple more? Right.
I was just going to say, I had a quick question for you. I'm back here.
Who are you?
Amy Schaefer. I do creative work for a nonprofit based on connecting kids. So obviously there's something that's very natural and totally kind of adorable about you. And I'm wondering...
That's what my husband didn't say.
How do I get that? No, just kidding. No, but seriously, how across your life, how has age and experience impacted the way that you view networking? Because it's clearly a very mature perspective on it. Have you had that always, or has that always kind of been, consistent in your life, or has age and kind of the people that you've met developed that to this point?
Well, first of all, thank you for those kind remarks. I think the honest answer is I'm non-threatening. I'm not an intellect, I'm not a beauty. So I think people don't sort of stand back from me in that sense. So I think in some ways, disadvantages can be advantages. I said to someone before I came on that I wasn't going to tell this story because it's too rude, but I will tell you now you've asked it. But my aunt was a nymphomaniac, and she says that when she was 3 or 4 years age, she remembers her first orgasm. Bloody good luck to her, I thought. But I remember when I was 3 or 4 years old, I kept thinking to myself, somebody knows. Whenever I wanted, I thought, somebody knows. And I think that I've always felt that somebody knows feeling about me that, is only, that ticket for the Mormon, Book of Mormon, I still like saying it, I rang my husband, and he said, give up, sweetheart. One I was offered at $685, one at $400. Before I could say yes, they'd already gone. But I kept on and on. I asked the taxi driver to drop me at the ticket office. I sat for two hours, or stood for 2 hours. I then asked the hotel to try again. I ended up, if I may tell you, with 3 tickets actually, because I got 2 extra from the hotel because they only sell 2 and not 1. What were I going to do with them? Could I give them away? Who to? Then one of these ticket touts came up and said, do you want to sell anything? I said I did. They were $69, but I'd paid $289 for each of them because I did it through one of these hotel booking through an agency. So he said to me, I'll give you 40 for them. I said, you must be mad. So in the end, I sold them for the $69 price. Why did I tell you that story? I can't remember. What was my question? I can't remember what that question was for. Anyway, the answer is I was shy, very, very shy, always. It wasn't until I took an interest in other people. And they say that Proust and various philosophers have always asked questions of people because everyone wants to make a good impression. And it's very flattering to ask people questions. So that's another point of networking. Have I got... Was that okay? And I've got one here, yes.
Hi, Carol. I'm Jane Werwent. I introed earlier.
You did, yes.
Dermalogica, the skincare line.
I'm going to come and see you.
First of all, I thought you were fantastic. I'm completely lit up about everything you said. I have a quick question, and that is, what is your thought now, with your many years of experience of successful networking and communication, of picking up a phone and calling, sending an email, sending a text? What do you think now is the best way to keep those relationships or contacts, not really relationships, going?
Absolutely essential. So the salon was one way of starting that because when you meet someone, you've got something to say, so good to meet you at We, thoroughly enjoyed, hope to see you next year. Meanwhile, do come, and you've got something to invite people to. Even if you belong to a club, you can invite them to an event at the club, but if you can hold your own, then that is inexpensive, non-headache-making wine or a cup of coffee. I'm not talking big money here for the salons, hour and a half the maximum. So that's one way of doing it, but I always follow up with an email, and if I haven't heard from someone for some while, and I read about them in the newspaper, or I suddenly come to my mind, I just drop a little email, how you're getting on, if I know that they've got a birthday coming up, or they had something wrong in their lives, or something good in their lives, that's an excuse to do it. But I think make contacts as much as you can. In a one way, whenever I start speaking, I say, don't become as compulsive as me because that way madness lies. Because I do it to the extent that I'm always answering emails. But I think you can just do one little shot. I love people who do those little, in fact, I almost have a competition. Who can be shortest? I'm going to do so-and-so, so I go, perfect. Whatever it is, it can be a tiny little thing. How are you? Long time not heard. Whatever it is. I think emails are best because I don't hardly get phone calls these days myself, and letters have almost gone out of business. So I think that's a good way. But if you think of things you can invite people to, do invite them. And if you're not sure whether you should do it or not, and you're thinking, am I too pushy, risk it, because a lot of people will be so pleased to hear from you, and for the odd one that doesn't matter, it doesn't matter. One more. That last one, is that my last? Right.
Hi, my name is Joni. How are you? I really enjoyed listening to you. Did you say earlier on that you wrote a book? And if you did, I would love to know the name of it. Did you say that you wrote a
how
networking
kind
book?
of you. What a nice thing. It was called The Art of Networking, The Art of Making Friends. I thought I was going to be Dale Carnegie and sell millions. I sold about 10,000. I had it serialized in the local paper. I was very pleased. Now I'm going to write a memoir. Can I just tell you this very quickly? A period of my life, I fell in love with a house in Italy 4 years ago. I thought it was absolutely wonderful, a wonderful view over the lake. I don't like the country, I don't like hills. It was right up in the hills, but I just saw it. And I put a deposit on it. Richard was with me. And when we got back, he said, I don't want it, sweetheart. I said, but I'm buying it, darling. He said, I don't want it. I don't like the feel of it. I don't want it. So I gave my deposit back, and every day for 18 months, I did not just cry, I grunted. If I was in the room now, I'd have to go out, the pain. And when I went to bed, I told myself this was absolutely ridiculous. It was like Teflon. I woke up in the morning, still crying. It was just absolutely extraordinary. Everyone said, never take us to that part of the world again. Bless his heart, he took me there. We rented the house. I cried most of the time. But then, when I couldn't rent that, when I rented the house below, and I did that, and one day I came out of that house, and I thought, if ever she sells, this in its way is magic. She sold, I bought, it was magic, it was more expensive, my husband loves it. Out of all that came that 18 months of agony, if you like, taught me so much about Richard, so much about myself, that I just want to sort of bring that in as to sort of the sort of things that can happen to you, and why things really do have a silver lining. Not always. You hear of people have horrendous things. Look at the Olympics back in the UK. Terrible things happened. The Paralympics. People came out of adversity, and it is absolutely extraordinary. I don't say we should all have unhappiness in our lives, but people who do overcome, I think, do go on to a completely better and different life. So thank you for that question. Sorry to being overrated, but you've been wonderful. Now you've got to go and network.